And we're happy to be part of this great occasion, the Howard India year event. And I want to bring in Dr. Rustagi, who is the professor and director of the Global Business Center.
Thank you, Dr. Ogbolu. I'm Narendra Rustagi. I'm director, as he said, Center for Global Business Studies, and Dr. Ogbolu is director, Center for Entrepreneurship. So we thought, given that Dr. Carver was a serial entrepreneur, so this would be the right class to have the presentation in. And as I didn't know much about him. As I read the book by Dr. Mrs. Veena Gawankar, I realized the contributions he had made, which is phenomenal. It's for anyone to achieve so much in a lifetime is amazing. Starting with nothing to be able to have respect and relationship with the then Vice President of the United States, industrialized like Henry Ford and all. So that was that's really amazing. So what I would do is I'll introduce Professor Marilyn Cipocle. She is professor in world languages and culture, and in her humanities classes, she teaches about African-American inventors. So with that, here is Professor Cipocle.
Well, good morning, Professor Narendra Rustagi. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I thank also the Embassy of India for organizing this event. I thank the author, Dr. Gawankar. As I often tell my classes, my students in my humanities classes, in my individual and society class in particular, from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night, they use an invention that was produced by a Black person, by an African-American, okay? So when they get up in the morning in a warm room, they ought to think about Alice Parker. Alice Parker was a Howard University engineering student who got a patent for inventing the gas furnace that we use every day to warm our homes. When we iron our clothes, we ought to think about Sarah Goody, the African-American who perfected the ironing board. When we put on our shoes, we ought to have in mind Jan Ernst Matzeliger. He was a Black Surinamese whose shoemaking machine revolutionized how we produce shoes. When we comb our hair, of course, we think of Madame C.J. Walker, and a trip to the elevator ought to equal a reverence to Alexander Miles. Alexander Miles figured out that elevators should have doors, doors that close so that people would not get injured. And when we take the train, for example, we should tip our hat off to Elijah McCoy. He was a Canadian-born African-American inventor who sped up the train with the lubrication of steam engines. And when we sit at our desk and we are working on the computer, names of African-Americans abound. For example, Mark Dean for the invention of the first gigahertz chip and the color monitor, and Clarence Ellis for the invention of Office Talk, which was the first system that allowed people to collaborate from a distance. And then, of course, we have Philip Emeagwali from Nigeria, who initially designed the fastest computer on Earth, and so on. So all day long, we use inventions that were made by African Americans, by Black people, and that are used every day in the world today, everywhere and every day. And when we have breakfast in the morning, of course, we should think of George Washington Carver. And George Washington Carver was, he was born into slavery. And when he was a week old, can you imagine? A week old, he, his sister, his mother were kidnapped, yeah, by a group of raiders. I mean, you could say they were the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan, and they raided the plantation where his family was enslaved. And the owner, their owner, Mr. what is his name? Carver, who was his name. He was a German immigrant. He was trying to get them back. And so from the very first, his very first breath, he was, his life was fraught with the challenge, with the, and when he was trying to get enrolled in school, in elementary school, it was a challenge. He was born 1 year before the abolition of slavery, but even after the abolition of slavery, enrolling in elementary school for a Black child was close to impossible. His father died about before he was even born. And he was accepted in university after finally finding a school that would accept him. He graduated and he was accepted at Highland University. But when he got there, again, he was rejected. He was rejected on the account of his race. But along the way, he found people such as Maria Watkins who encouraged him to learn as much as he could. And the result is phenomenal. George Washington Carver was way ahead of his time. He was promoting environmentalism before environmentalism was the order of the day, before we even knew about environmentalism. And he is known, of course, for improving the lives and a lot of farmers, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And so the lives, a lot of farmers was at the heart of his concerns, and he became known worldwide for preserving food and much more. But what I want to, the message that I want to convey is how difficult it was, how challenging it was for African Americans to not only produce their inventions, but also to have those inventions recognized by their countrymen, by their countrymen in particular. When we think of African American inventors who had tremendous challenge, I mean, we think of Louis Latimer. Louis Latimer worked with Thomas Edison. He's the one who perfected the light bulb. But when we think of the light bulb today, people blurt out most of the time Thomas Edison's name. We think of Charles Drew, who invented the use of transfusion of plasma for transfusion. I mean, his invention was not recognized in the United States. In the United States, racism was so prevalent that they thought that transfusion of the blood of a Black person would make a white person Black, or they had all kinds of very crazy notions, very absurd notions. It's not until his invention was recognized in England that it was accepted in the United States later on. So I'm just mentioning all these examples to show you the climate in which Dr. George Washington Carver, who is a contemporary of Charles Drew, a contemporary more or less also of Louis Latimer, had to fight in order to make his inventions known around the world, first in the United States and then around the world. So I will stop here, and I will thank you for your attention, and I will leave the floor for the experts of Washington Carver, Dr. Washington Carver's experts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sipokle. Next, we would hear from Mrs. Veena Gawankar. She had similar journey, starting, from, or I'll let her tell the story as to how she developed the book, wrote it, and then that is followed by several biographies of prominent people. So with that, Mrs. Veena Gawankar.
Thank you. Greetings from this country, India. Namaste. I am glad to know that people from a distant country are eager to know about my book written 40 years ago. This indicates that certain values, virtues, have no barriers of boundaries, race, caste, creed, time, or languages. When such values are personified in a human being, that person becomes ideal for other people, and we find in him our hero. Before going towards how I found my hero, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and brought up in a rural part of India. In my childhood, I'm talking about the early period, early 1940s and late 1940s and early 1950s. There was hardly any outdoor life for girls. Reading was the only source of entertainment. There were no public libraries. Whatever was available in school libraries, I read. From then on, reading became my hobby, my passion. And then that led to me study library science after my BA. After my postgraduate diploma in library science, I started working as a librarian at a college. In my college days and when I was working as a librarian, I read profusely. After working for 5 years, I got married and left the job. My husband is also a book lover. We started to collect the books for our children even before they were born. We have 2 children. I used to read bedtime stories for them. In those days, I was reading Dr. Carver's biography written by George Lipscomb and Shirley Graham. This book was brought by a second-hand bookseller. Still that copy is with me. And I used to read bedtime story, and I started reading this. I was reading Dr. Carver's biography at the same time. This book I got fascinated by this book, and I thought I should tell this story to my children. But what happened is this: the younger one, our son, would fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of the storytelling session. But I would need to continue because the older one, Sheetal, who is here today, would still be awake and eager to hear more. The following night, however, I had to start from the time the younger one had fallen asleep, but the older one, Sheetal, would get impatient because it would become mostly a repeat session for her. So then, after the first couple of days, Sheetal suggested that I should write down the story so she could read it to the younger brother. And then after he falls asleep, I would start from where I had left off with her. And so then I started writing the story of Dr. Carver in a notebook. Sheetal used to read the story for her younger brother till I joined them for the next part of the story. It took 15 days and a handwritten 200-page notebook to finish the story. One of my acquaintances, a school teacher, saw my notebook. He read it and asked me, "Why do you want to keep this story only for your children? Let other children also read it. It is very inspirational, motivational, but there are many gaps in it. You might have explained so many things, while telling this story to your children. To tell the story to others, please include some context for those, especially for children who may know nothing about slavery, the struggle of African American, basic agriculture, all these such things. And here ends the story about what made me to tell the Carver story, what made me search for more details of his life. Why was I so determined to write this life? There is no one-line answer for it. There was purpose behind this storytelling. My family, though not rich, was well settled. My children had ample things without asking for them. Actually, I used to provide for their needs before they asked for them. I realized I must make my children understand why they want to study. What are they going to do with their education? They should respect the dignity of labor, keep on striving for goals. Money should not be a goal for their life. Simplicity, honesty, compassion, dedication, self-confidence, all virtues I found in Dr. Carver's life, and I wanted to convince them that if an orphan child can fight with the adverse circumstances, they have no excuses. I used to tell them, you have all sorts of facilities and privileges. You should not hang on excuses for being not able to attain your goal. And one more thing, if you come across a person who is struggling against the odds, give him helping hand. Lessen his troubles, clear his path. To enhance positive thought of my story, I searched for the other biographies of Dr. Carver. Fortunately, I was able to obtain his biographies written by others. I also read Dr. Booker T. Washington's Up from the Slavery and My Larger Education to better understand the background of Dr. Carver's life. I collected suitable material for my story from these books. I was totally ignorant of the skill of book writing. At the same time, I was fully engrossed in constructing Dr. Carver's story. When I was describing his childhood and social atmosphere of that period of America, my observations and memories of my childhood surfaced. I had seen the poverty of poor farmers, had seen their broken hearts. I had witnessed how they helped each other in calamities, how they supported the orphan children in the community. My reading and my childhood observations helped me while expressing my understanding of Dr. Carver's life. I was writing and rewriting the story until I was sure that I could not write better than this version. And it never felt to me that I am writing a book and not a story only for my children. It took 2 years to complete that writing. First, it was published in a magazine in 1979 and was received extremely well. In those days, there were no mobiles, no emails, no internet, no media. Soon the letters from the readers flooded my house. There was a demand to publish this life in a book form. So the publisher had it published on simple newsprint paper to keep the price of the book within the reach of poor students. Since 1980, this book has been reprinted every year. It is currently in its 46th reprint. In 1983, the Director of Education of Maharashtra State recommended this book for all school libraries by issuing special circular. This helped the book to reach even in remote corner of the state. Teachers were happy to welcome this book as it projects hero for rural students to welcome who were aspiring for education, struggling against the odds, dreaming for better life. In some rural schools, there was practice of loud reading of this book. before the class began. Instead of blaming the system, we can create something constructive, was the message for adults. Young farmers did loud reading of this book in their study circles. Many schools invited me to talk about this hero. It was difficult for me to explain to those students how these people look like, how were their log houses. In those days, there were no TV sets in rural India. It was difficult for them to visualize the log houses, his first laboratory, his cart, horse-driven plows, and such things. We could not add any pictures, as me and my publisher were trying to keep the price of the book as low as possible. It was only after 20 years since the first edition in the year 2000, in the 18th reprint, that we finally added photos. I would like to share some of the stories of how this biography changed some lives. Sandeep, for instance, was a social worker in hospital in Mumbai. When he saw many homeless, aged, mentally disturbed people, poverty-stricken people living their life on footpath, he left his job and started his social service on his own. He used to wash them, shave them, clean their wounds, provide them with the medicines. Seeing this selfless work, people extended their help. He established Carver Day Care Center for these destitute people. He invited me for its inauguration. He expressed publicly, I got inspiration from Dr. Carver. How to be selfless, how to serve mankind. Ek Hota Carver, that is the name of my book. It means there was a carver, has shown me my goal. And yes, to this date, Sandeep is running non-governmental organization in remote area. Someone has donated 2 acres of land. He has built a shelter home using discarded material. 150 patients are residing there. Now his organization conducts courses for social workers. One psychiatrist from Pune prescribes this book as antidepressant. He says this book gives positivity, helps the patient to overcome his gloomy state of mind. During this pandemic period, many readers of this book expressed on Facebook that Ek Hota Carver has given them positive energy to overcome the depression. This book is transformed into audiobook and in Braille. Whenever I meet these special readers, they admit that Dr. Carver's story is their guide. He has shown them the path of struggle, the merits of life, and advised them never to be pessimist. A professor of chemistry, after reading this biography, left his job of teaching and started grapevines. He took 30 acres of land under his project. Witnessing his success, 25 small landholders joined him. They cultivated good quality grapes, exported them to various countries. Excuse me. Dr. Carver's life has changed many lives for the better in a country half the globe away. It has given a positive message and courage to achieve the goal, has assured success in hard work, in consistent efforts, in scientific measures. Dr. Carver's life gives courage to many, and I value that. Society is made of people. If one's life is guiding them to lead their life on right path and keep away from consumerism, that is enough for me. One last thing I would like to add. It was my very first book. Without knowing the methodology of book writing, I did it. Fortunately, it was appreciated greatly by the readers from various strata. And that appreciation encouraged me to write various biographies. Ek Hota Carver made me a well-known biographer in Marathi, that is my mother tongue. Dr. Carver changed my life and helped me to explore my abilities. I never dreamed that one day I would be conversing with the university elites for my book, which was actually meant for my children, which to my surprise turned out to be for adults. Finally, I would like to conclude this short speech with many thanks to the Indian consulate officials and Howard University for selecting Ek Hota Carver for the India Year of Howard University. Thank you.
I am delighted that my work in building global bio-based economy by providing innovative technology solutions for sustainable decarbonization is recognized by Bio for the George Washington Carver Award. I gratefully acknowledge that I am the first Indian to receive this award. I dedicate it to all the people in my country who are harnessing the power of biotechnology to make India more prosperous. I strongly believe education, innovation and entrepreneurship in the bioeconomy will help India cope with the challenges of scarcity, security and scalability. While this recognition fills me with immense pride, it is also humbling to acknowledge that Dr. Carver achieved so much despite the challenges of his times. In that respect, he was a true pioneer. He saw far into the application of agri in industrial biotech, paving the way for hundreds of students and professionals in this sector to follow in his footsteps. To put it in his own words, win without bragging, lose if the need be without squealing. Early stages of my entrepreneurship, I happened to read a book by Veena, the biography of Dr. Carver. In fact, the book Ek Hota Carver has been a familiar feature in many Marathi middle-class households and even part of additional reading in school curriculums. For me personally, it helped develop a strong conviction and has an immense potential to be environmental, economic and social enabler for India's progress.
I came from a small farming family background in Nasik area in Maharashtra state. In college days, I read Ek Hota Carver book written by Veena Gawankar, and that book inspired me during college days itself. I decided to work for my community for development of agriculture and rural community in Maharashtra state, and that thought is now built with the organization known as Sayatri Farmers Producer Company, which is owned by 7,000 plus farmers, and all these farmers, small and marginal farmers, who came together to create a complete ecosystem along with production, post-harvest marketing under one brand name. So that has created an impact on Nasik and surrounding areas local community, and that has given sustainable growth approach for all these small and marginal farmers. Actually, the work which has done by Dr. Carver in U.S.A, that is actually the must needed for all the farmer community in developing countries, and we are learning from his life and trying to implicate all that learning in our area with the Sayatri Farmers Producer Company as a front for all the marginal farmers ecosystem.
Thank you. And next, we would have Dr. Parag Vishal Payan join us online. Dr. Vishal Payan is the space biology portfolio scientist at NASA's Ames Research Center in California, Silicon Valley. He specializes in the field of space biology, astrobiology, and planetary protection, and provides overall scientific leadership and direction to NASA ARC's space biology portfolio. Before joining NASA Ames, he worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where he supported planetary protection, implementation for several NASA missions. Dr. Vishal Payan.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And Namaste Veena, Namaste Sheetal. It's my pleasure to be in this program. I'll just be very short because I can talk about Dr. Carver and Veena for hours and hours. But I got this book, Ek Hota Carver, written by Veena when I was only in 4th grade. And when I read the book, I didn't understand what I have read. And after that, I read this book again and again and again. And I decided right from there and then that I will be a scientist. I had no idea what scientist is and what kind of scientist I will be. But that was my passion. And it was very easy for Indian students to be either doctor or engineer. But I chose the path to be a scientist. And here I am today working for NASA for the last 15 years. And that's all because of the seed Veena has planted. When I was in 4th grade, she did that almost 40 years back. And a full circle when I organized a workshop for African American students across US. And one of the university was Tuskegee University, where Carver actually did his work. And I was fortunate enough to stand in front of Carver's lab and actually witness where he has worked. And I was able to teach the students there. And the last thing is currently I'm working on International Space Station. But eventually we will have a commercial International Space Station, which is called Skylab. And the research lab in that new space station is named after George W. Carver. So now it will be known as George W. Carver Science Park. So I'm really fortunate that one day I will work for George W. Science Park up in the space station. With that, I would like to thank again for all the organizers for inviting me and sharing my experience. And again, I would like to thank Veena for writing the book almost 40 years back. And I'm the only one of many people, I would say probably thousands and thousands of people who are inspired by her book. Thank you.
My name is Udayan Apte. I'm a professor of toxicology at University of Kansas Medical Center. I also grew up like Parag in India, and I speak the same language. I grew up in a very rural area, small town in Western India. And I read the book probably when I was 10 or 12 years old. My father was a doctor, so according to the Indian tradition, I was supposed to be a doctor too. And I didn't really find that very exciting. And fortunately, my mom was a librarian, actually, just like Veena. And we had books all around our home all the time. And she brought this book to me, and I read it once. And I realized that there's something exciting about this. And I read it again and again. And then that really triggered the idea that I should possibly try a career in science and become a biomedical scientist of some sort. And then I followed that path, and I'm now a biomedical scientist. Dr. Carver influenced me more than just showing me the career path. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. The town I grew up is in Western India. It's a rural town. And the area of town that I grew up in was a classic mixture of middle class, lower middle class, and extremely poor people. It was a sort of a cross section of Indian society from, people from all religions, all castes. And I grew up with a lot of kids who were extremely poor and underprivileged. After reading Carver's book, my attitude towards my friends changed. It didn't change overnight, of course, but slowly I started realizing that there are people who are less fortunate than me, and there has to be a conversation about that, and you have to sort of understand that they have different challenges than that I probably will never have. And so that definitely made me a more empathetic person. And it continued towards my journey in university. I went to a small rural university. Again, most of my fellow students in my master's degree came from really deep rural towns, and they could come there and study only because they had scholarships, and only because they were working at the same time where they studied. And I could see Carver in them, directly see Carver in them. A lot of them had small lands. They used to go back and help their parents sow the seed and come back and study. The only thing was, common between all of them was the drive for knowledge. And by that time, I had read Carver several times, and it had a completely different meaning for me. And then I came to United States, and fortunately, I landed in Louisiana. I say fortunately because U.S. is a very diverse country. And when back in India in early 90s, growing up, I didn't know how US looked. We didn't have internet. Everything was from movies. And I thought everything looks like New York, right? Or California. And here I am in middle of nowhere in Monroe, Louisiana, 55% Black population. Our school was small, 10,000 students, about half Black students, half white students and others. All my neighbors were Black. And from day one, my attitude towards my neighbors and my fellow students was completely different than other immigrants who were coming, other students who were coming. And I thank Veenatai's book because I had read Carver. I had known their struggle. I could see them in a completely different light. And I know that even as an immigrant student, I was probably more privileged than some of them will ever be. And that completely changed the way I have lived in the US. And so in a way, over the years, it has made me a better American citizen when I became an American citizen. And my attitude towards my fellow countrymen has been substantially affected by one book that I read probably 40 years ago, just like Parag was saying. So it has affected deeply the overall attitude that I have. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Udaran Apte. And with this, we'll go to questions either from students in the room or anyone else who have joined online.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Diamond Glover. I am a junior psychology major, chemistry and biology double minor from the state of New Jersey, currently attending Howard University. My question was for, I believe it was Dr. Apte, the last person to speak, if I'm pronouncing that right. Okay. I wanted to know, how did you go about, I know that you said that you were typically or traditionally supposed to follow your father's footsteps in the doctor path, but I know that you said you became a pardon me, it's leaving me, but you understand what I'm talking about. I wanted to know how you went about your studies and where did you start with that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess very great question. Thank you so much. And we can, discuss more offline about this. But briefly, growing up in India, that was quite traditional to have two paths to salvation, being engineer or doctor, and everything else was kind of a bigger, different dream. But I was fortunate to have great teachers, and they kind of showed me a path. I also, of course, Dr. Carver was a big inspiration. I used to collect long threads and broken light bulbs because I want to start in my own laboratory in a spare room in my dad's clinic. It was kind of a big pipe dream, of course. But what happened was I had another role model. My aunt became a scientist later, and I essentially followed her path. So I realized that to become a scientist, I have to train myself in basic sciences, basically things like what you're doing, biology and chemistry and zoology. And over the years, my choices changed. I wanted to be a marine biologist first, but then I wanted to become a cell biologist. And in the end, I found out that chemicals can affect pretty much everything we do. And I ended up becoming a toxicologist, which I absolutely love. So the path was not like straightforward. I kind of evolved as I went, but I focused mainly on studying basic sciences rather than applied sciences like engineering and medicine.
Thank you. That was really insightful. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely ask for your information so we can get.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, sure.
Thanks, Diamond. Anyone else?
Can I say something real quick,
Yeah,
just
sure.
related to that? As I said, I'm a professor of toxicology, and one of the major things that in the field of toxicology, not only in toxicology, and Parag can also chime in sciences, we are trying to do is to increase diversity, right? There was a period in time when there was not enough women in science. Fortunately, that is slowly changing. Now there are a lot more women. In our graduate program, for example, there are more women than men now, which is great. We still do not have enough people of color. And there is a drive to do that. It's hard. It has to start at high school level and even before that to get people to think about science and how they can come into this. And that's what, I've always been really inspired by Carver's book. I keep going back to it all the time to find his anecdotes. And I think his story has been kind of lost in America a little bit. We need to bring him back and make him a celebrity again, where, people can get inspired from what he did. And if you really want more people of color in sciences, they need to find heroes. They need to find role models, and we have role models. It's not like we don't. We just need to make them more prominent, and I think that would really help. A lot of societies, for example, Society of Toxicology, Federation of Experimental Biology Societies, they're trying to have programs specifically for people of color, and we need to advertise them and get students encouraged to join that. So there are a lot of paths in sciences for everybody, and I think we need to take those opportunities.
Dr. Narendra Rustagi, there is a student who's handed.
Yeah, that's where I was coming to. Next is Augie Brown.
Hi, my name's Ajay Brown. I am a senior. I am from San Diego, California, biology major, chemistry minor. My question was for Professor Veena G. She mentioned earlier in her story about how her son, she was telling her son and her daughter about her stories and basically the hardships that she was going through and how she did everything she did to get to where she is today. I wanted to know, would you say that that is a cultural thing where your son wasn't as interested in as what you had to say as far as working versus your daughter? Because I feel like a lot of cultures, unfortunately, they seem to teach their daughters more so about the education and getting higher up and making sure that we're at a certain level, but they don't really focus as much with the males in a lot of cultures. They more so focus for males, like the labor, the hard work, making sure they're headstrong, body, physical strong versus book strong. And I just wanted to know, would you say you experienced that? And if so, how did you kind of change that? And are you changing that mentality to this point today?
Unmute. Unmute.
Hello. When I was telling this story to my children, they were very young. My son was of 4 years old and my daughter was 7 years old. So naturally, he used to go to sleep earlier. But one thing happened. When he grew up, he read the book, and both of my children, they appreciated his virtues, his qualities, his values. And am I correct, Sheetal? Am I on right path?
Okay. Right. So what she ती विचारते की ह्याच्यात कल्चरल काही आहे का की तो आधी का झोपला ती नंतर का फक्त वयाचाच भाग आहे. That is the
only age is the age difference. He was 4 or 5 years old and Sheetal was 7 or 8 years old. So naturally he used to go to sleep earlier. But he read the book, and both of my children, I am proud of them. They respect, they value Carver's virtues. Though they are in different field of knowledge, both of them, they are very, hardworking. They believe in scientific measures. They believe in dedication. So I'm happy, whatever field they have chosen, they are happy with their fields. And that first thing was that, what are you going to do with your education? Was my only concern for them. But both, I'm happy, both of them, they had their own ways of their life and they successfully went ahead.
So Aji, so I think to your question, there is no cultural reason why, it was just the age why he slept early. So.
Thank you. I was just curious if it had to be to that at all.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It's been such a pleasure to be able to hear everyone's experiences and just to hear the connection between George Washington Carver in India. I think to some of the similar points that have already been made today, that there is such a strong connection. And I'm so incredibly excited that this opportunity is present and available so that we are able to kind of share in that connection in such a meaningful way. And then also for a lot of the undergraduate students here today to just recognize that connection to India and to also just acknowledge how that there are so many amazing opportunities. And I'm so incredibly pleased that we're just able to share in this conversation today around a topic that is so incredibly important, not just in terms of the agricultural piece, but in terms of cross-cultural exchange. So again, thank you so much to the Embassy of India, and then also to Dr. Sefale for organizing this event today.
Next, we have Tyler Milliner from Dr. Ogbolu's class. So Tyler.
Hello, my name is Tyler Milliner. I am a junior finance major from Detroit, Michigan. Also a student athlete on Howard's football team. And I had a question. I said, what do you think the stigma behind why people don't go into these industries? And what could we like do to combat that in different areas?
Tyler, are you asking about sciences and why?
Yeah, like sciences. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think there's a stigma. I think it's just, you know, the way education is oriented, you know, the people who end up in graduate school, for example, they have significant opportunity beforehand. They are generally the honor students, and you know, they have had special trainings and classes, and they go to better schools, and they have, you know, stability and better financial situations. So it's not so much about the stigma, it's really about opportunity. And that's where the change has to happen. And I think the change is happening. People are now aware that the opportunity has to be there, and those are now being provided slowly. There's, you know, it's going to take some time, but at least there is an awakening. There is a realization that that needs to happen.
All right, thank you.
Speaking from my personal experience as well, as Dr. Apte said, you know, when we were young or your age, the opportunities were limited. And the way to advance fast was either you become a medical professional, doctor, or an engineer. But when you look at kids today, even in India, you see people have very diverse interests and pursue their dreams a lot more. But again, I mean, in the way I read it, from my perspective, we generally say, okay, a role model for African Americans, but to me, he is a role model not just for African Americans, but for the whole humanity. I mean, you know, someone who started with nothing, went hungry as a child, but pursued the school, became a prominent scientist, gaining respect and reverence from even U.S. Vice President Calvin Coolidge, and industrialists like Henry Ford. So that's an amazing journey. Now, anyone else who has some thoughts?
I just want to say something about Dr. Carver's journey. If if you guys ever have a chance, please visit his birthplace monument. It is an amazing place. It's a little bit hard to get, unfortunately. The easiest way to get is to come to Kansas City and drive down about 2.5 hours. It's in a place called Diamond, Missouri, near Joplin, Missouri. And it's the first national monument dedicated to a Black person. It is a beautiful library. It has beautiful grounds, and it actually sits on the land owned by the Carver family. That, you know, technically were his parents. And so it is actually where he was born. There is a shack there where you can see his shack, and they have his, you know, a lot of these artifacts. And most importantly, now the library actually hosts Veena Tai's book. We were able to take the book there, and they have actually, you know, displayed the book there, and it's such a pleasure to see that connection being made. And people are really surprised that thousands of miles away there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of kids who knew about him. And you know, thanks to Veena Tai's book, really, it's not only an inspiration for a few of us, it's just kind of a change for a generation for us there. It happened. But do visit the Carver Birth Monument. It says it's an incredible place, actually.
All right, if there are no comments, then we would like to thank everyone for your participation. And, you know, I had meant to recognize Dr. Veena Gawankar, but she was introduced by Veena ji anyway. So we'll stop there, and thank you, everyone.